At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. As the Voidbreaker made its way back to the Galactic Council headquarters, the crew gathered around the navigation screen, laughing at the tiny dot drifting farther behind. The human vessel that was supposedly meant to keep pace with them as they returned to report the completion of a successful first contact mission. Captain Igti felt the tension of the past months melting from his shoulders like ice under a sun. The diplomatic talks, the careful translations, the endless documentation, all of it was behind them now. He allowed himself the luxury of casualness, something he rarely permitted on duty. His scaled hand, warm from the ship's climate controls, settled comfortably on the shoulder of his navigator, then moved to pat the chief engineer's gelatinous upper portion. "Can you believe those humans still use their first-generation warp core?" Igti's voice was filled with the amusement that had been building throughout their journey home. He looked between his two senior officers. His eye membranes flickered with mirth. "How many centuries has it been since they joined the Council? 200 years? And yet they still use that same primitive technology." Trix, the chief engineer, rippled with what passed for laughter among his species. The red blob had mastered the art of maintaining a bipedal form, though it took considerable concentration. Now, relaxed and entertained, his surface undulated with waves of color that signaled deep amusement. He turned his sensory organs toward the captain, his form wobbling a bit with the movement. "A species that keeps their first-generation warp cores for so long is unheard of." Trix's voice bubbled from somewhere within his gelatinous mass. "Someone should create an award for the least innovative species in the galaxy. I nominate humanity for first place. No, wait, I insist they receive first place. There's literally no competition." More laughter rippled through the bridge. Several crew members had abandoned their stations now that they were on a straight course home, the autopilot handling the routine journey. They clustered around the main navigation display, watching that lonely dot fall further and further behind. Lizzle the navigator was a Zeral species, whose transparent skin revealed the intricate workings of their internal systems. Her uniform covered most of her body, but the gelatinous skin of her neck was visible, showing the constant inner motions of what served as her circulatory system. She turned from the main screen, her internal organs shifting with the movement, creating mesmerizing patterns beneath her translucent flesh. "With those primitive engines, humans certainly get left behind even by space pirates," she said, her voice serious. "I mean, think about it. Even the most basic pirate vessel, cobbled together from spare parts and running on black market fuel, has better technology than what humanity flies. It's actually impressive in its own way. They're like a museum piece that somehow got voting rights in the Council." The comparison sparked another round of laughter. Igti's laugh was a series of sharp clicks from the back of his throat, while Trix's entire form jiggled like disturbed gelatin. Lizzle's laughter manifested as a fluttering of her internal membranes, visible through her neck, creating a strobe effect that was hypnotic to watch. The moment of levity was interrupted by an unarmed crew member, Krell, a junior sensor technician, who approached from the rear sensor station. His antennae were rigid in a way that suggested confusion rather than alarm. "Captain, so sorry to interrupt, but the human ship seems to be moving a bit faster than it's supposed to." The laughter died down, but smiles remained on the faces or face equivalents of those gathered. Igti waved a dismissive hand. "Sensor drift, probably. We've been in deep space for months. The equipment needs recalibration." But Trix was already extending a pseudopod toward his wrist-mounted diagnostic tool, his professional instincts overriding his casual mood. The device was standard issue for all engineering officers, a compact scanner that could interface with the ship's systems and provide real-time diagnostics. He manipulated the controls quickly, his form solidifying a little as he concentrated. The colors that played across his surface shifted from the warm reds and oranges of amusement to cooler blues and greens. "Multiple sensors are capturing it," he announced, his voice losing its jovial tone. "The readings are consistent across all arrays. Something is definitely wrong with the way they're moving. Or rather, something is definitely different." Lizzle had already turned back to her navigation console, her fingers more delicate than Igti's scaled digits, moving quickly across the controls. "At this pace, they'll catch up with us in a few minutes." She looked up, her internal organs working faster, a sign of stress among her people. "Captain, these readings don't make sense. They shouldn't be capable of this speed. Their technology is
primitive,"
Igti finished, but the word came out with less certainty than before. He began pacing the bridge, his clawed feet pressing against the metal deck plates. The sound echoed in the suddenly quiet space. Each step, a metronome marking his thoughts.
"It's more likely they'll overheat their core first. These old systems weren't built for sustained high-speed travel. They'll burn out their coolant systems, blow a manifold, or trigger a dozen other failure cascades we solved centuries ago."
He paused mid-stride, turning to face his crew. Several pairs of eyes and eye equivalents watched him, waiting for guidance.
"Besides, it's fine if they catch up. We're not enemies or anything. They are just some primitive aliens we have little contact with. There's no regulation that says they can't fly beside us for the final approach."
The crew accepted his words with various gestures of acknowledgement. The tension eased, though it didn't disappear entirely. Most of them drifted back to the navigation screen, drawn by the curiosity of watching the impossible. The green dot that represented the human vessel was growing larger, the distance between the two ships shrinking with every passing moment. "The space distortion reading still shows signatures matching those primitive warp drives," Lizzle said, her voice somewhat serious. "The ones that humanity is famous for still using. It's like watching an ancient ground vehicle somehow keeping pace with a maglev train. The technology shouldn't allow for this speed." Igti found himself drawn back to the screen as well, his pacing forgotten. He stood among his crew, all of them united in their incomprehension. The bridge had become an impromptu classroom where the lesson made no sense, where the fundamental laws they'd been taught were being casually violated by a species that should have known better than to even try. "They're very close now," Lizzle announced. "At this distance, we could even establish communications if we wanted to."
"It's not like we have anything to say," Igti replied, trying to maintain his casual demeanor. "All the official business is dealt with. The mission reports are filed, the diplomatic formalities are complete. There's no reason to—"
"Captain?" the communications officer interrupted, her feather crest rising in surprise. She was a kavri, a bird-like species known for their acute hearing and perfect memory of verbal exchanges. "The humans are requesting contact." The bridge fell silent, their own breathing the only background sound. Igti felt every eye turned toward him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again.
"Well," he said finally, his voice somewhat strained, "I suppose it would be rude not to answer. Put them through."
The main view screen flickered, and suddenly the serious faces of the bridge crew were replaced by the image of a human, Captain John Parker. If Igti remembered correctly, and he prided himself on remembering names, even the human ones. The human was smiling, a broad expression that showed his teeth, which Igti had learned was meant to be friendly rather than threatening despite how it looked.
"Captain Igti!" Parker's voice was warm, enthusiastic. "Good to see you again. How's the journey treating you?" "Captain Parker,"
Igti inclined his head in a gesture of respect that was universal across most council species.
"We are well. The Void Breaker is performing optimally. And your vessel?" "Oh, she's purring like a kitten," Parker said, which meant absolutely nothing to Igti. Human idioms were particularly challenging. "Listen, I hope you don't mind me calling. I know all the official stuff is wrapped up, but I wanted to chat before we both dock." Igti felt a flicker of confusion. Chat? Is there a problem, Captain? A mechanical issue? We could slow our pace if you need time for repairs.
Parker's smile widened. Oh, no, nothing like that. It's just, well, this mission was pretty boring, wasn't it? Don't get me wrong, first contact is important, vital even. But months in uncharted space, following diplomatic protocols, maintaining professional distance, speaking in formal registers every time our crews interact, it gets old. I thought maybe we could liven things up a bit for the final stretch.
Captain Parker, Igti said, his patience wearing thin despite himself. Please get to the point.
The human's eyes sparkled with something that Igti couldn't quite identify. Right, sorry. I get chatty when I'm excited. Here's what I'm thinking. How about a little friendly competition? You and your crew versus me and mine. Igti glanced around his bridge, seeing his own confusion reflected in the faces of his crew. Trix had solidified almost completely, a sign of intense focus. Lizzle's internal organs had stopped their normal pulsing, held in suspension.
What exactly did you have in mind, Captain?
Parker leaned forward, his smile becoming impossibly even wider. A race, simple as that. Whoever arrives last at Council headquarters has to pay for the winner's dinner. Nothing major, just a friendly bet to break the ice. Or rather, the ice that's been in place for the last few months. I really think it could help smooth over some of the awkwardness that's plagued our professional relationship. What do you say? A bet. Igti was familiar with the concept, wagering resources on an uncertain outcome. It was popular among several council species, though his own people considered it somewhat frivolous. But the human had a point about the awkwardness. Despite the mission's success, there had been a stiffness to every interaction, a formal distance that was perhaps wider than strictly necessary. He surveyed the faces of his crew, looking for objections. Trix's colors had shifted to a curious yellow-orange. Lizzle's membranes were fluttering again, but with excitement rather than stress. Krell's antennae had perked up, and the communication officer's crest was fully extended. Several crew members were nodding or performing the equivalent gestures of their species.
Very well, Captain Parker, Igti said, straightening his posture. We accept your challenge. Whoever arrives last at headquarters will pay for dinner. You have the word of the Voidbreaker and her crew.
Excellent! Parker clapped his hands together. I knew you were good sports. May the best crew win. See you at dinner, Captain. Parker out. The screen went dark, returning to the view of the navigation display. Igti turned to his crew, feeling a competitive fire ignite in his chest.
You heard the human. Let's show them how much better our warp core is.
He raised his voice, projecting it across the bridge.
All hands to stations! Engineering, I want full power to the FTL engines. Navigator, plot the most efficient course. Communications, monitor their position. Let's leave them so far behind they'll need a telescope to see us.
The bridge erupted in lively cooperation. The casual atmosphere evaporated, replaced by focused resolve tinged with excitement. The engineering team scrambled to their stations, their hands interacting with every control. Trix flowed across the bridge toward his primary console, his gelatinous form stretching in ways that could have been disturbing if Igti wasn't so used to it.
Full power to engines,
Trix called out, his voice vibrating with the intensity of rapid information processing. All systems nominal. We're at maximum sustainable velocity. They're going to eat our plasma trail. He paused. Captain, the humans are getting faster. Lizille's voice cut through the sudden tension. Confirmed. They're accelerating beyond predicted parameters. Their speed is increasing exponentially. There has to be a mistake, someone muttered from one of the science stations. Apparently not, Lizille replied, her eyes focused on her displays. The light from the screens played across her transparent skin, making her internal structures glow with an eerie beauty. Igti moved to stand behind his navigator, watching the display over her shoulder. The green dot representing the human ship was approaching rapidly now, the distance between them shrinking at an alarming rate.
Engineering, are we truly at maximum power?
Affirmative, Captain, Trix responded, his entire mass quivering with the effort of monitoring multiple systems simultaneously. We're running at 100% capacity. The core is performing perfectly.
We literally cannot go faster without risking structural damage or core breach." "Then how?" Igti breathed the question, not really expecting an answer. Lizzle's response was quiet and shy. "I don't know, Captain. It shouldn't be possible." The bridge had fallen into a hushed stillness, the kind of quiet that precedes significant moments. Every crew member who wasn't essential to operations had gravitated toward the view screen, drawn by the spectacle of the impossible. The human ship's icon crept closer and closer, defying every expectation, every calculation, every fundamental principle of faster-than-light travel that the Council had established over millennia. "They're going to overtake us," Lizzo said, her voice filled with a note of disbelief. "In approximately 30 seconds, the human vessel will pass the Voidbreaker." "That shouldn't be happening," Igti said, but the words were hollow. He was watching the same displays as everyone else. The evidence was undeniable, no matter how much it contradicted everything he knew. 20 seconds. The crew stood frozen, watching. Some had abandoned pretense of working entirely, their stations forgotten in the face of this unprecedented event. Trix had formed something approximating a face, his sensory organs all focused on the main screen. 10 seconds. Igti found himself holding his breath, a useless physiological response that he couldn't suppress. His hands gripped the back of Lizzle's chair so tightly that his claws left small indentations in the material. 5 seconds. The view screen showed a simulation of the space around them. The actual view would have been meaningless at these speeds, just distorted streaks of light as they raced through the fabric of space-time. But the simulation was accurate, fed by their sensors, processed by their computers, and what it showed was impossible. The human ship appeared beside them, its blocky utilitarian hull rendered in perfect detail. For a moment, the two vessels flew side by side, matched in speed despite the vast gulf in their technological capabilities. Igti could make out details of the human ship's exterior, the worn plating, the mismatched patches where repairs had been made, the almost comical assortment of sensor arrays that bristled from its surface like the quills of some strange creature. Then, impossibly, the human ship pulled ahead. It was moving faster, actually measurably, undeniably faster than the Voidbreaker at full power. The most advanced vessel in Igti's fleet, equipped with the latest generation warp core, optimized by centuries of engineering refinement, powered by exotic matter that cost more than some planet's GDP, and it was being overtaken by a ship running on what amounted to historical artifacts. The crew watched in absolute silence as the human vessel gained distance. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stood there, transfixed by the sight of everything they knew about physics and engineering, being casually disproven by a species that, until 5 minutes ago, they'd been laughing at. The human ship pulled further ahead. 10 ship lengths, 20, 50. The gap widened with each passing second until finally, inevitably, the human vessel disappeared from their sensors' effective range, too distant to track clearly. It had simply vanished ahead, swallowed by the vast distances of space, leaving the Voidbreaker and her stunned crew in its wake. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Igti slowly released his grip on the chair, noticing with distant surprise that his hands were trembling. He looked around his bridge, seeing his own shock mirrored in every face. Finally, Krell spoke, his voice small and confused. "So, we have to buy them dinner now?" It was such a mundane observation, so utterly practical in the face of what they'd just witnessed, that it broke through the shock. A few crew members laughed, though the sound was brittle and uncertain. "I mean, we agreed to the bet, right?" Krell continued, his antennae drooping. "A deal's a deal." Another crew member, a Korthan whose name Igti couldn't recall at the moment, turned toward him.
"Captain, do we really have to? I mean, surely there's some kind of, I don't know, technical violation? They must have done something outside regulations."
Igti straightened, feeling the weight of command settle back onto his shoulders. "We gave our word is binding. The humans won fairly. We will honor our agreement."
"But how did they do it?"
Trix's voice held a note of desperation, the plea of an engineer confronted with the inexplicable. Their technology is primitive. We've seen their specs, we've read the reports. There's no way a first-generation warp core should be capable of those speeds. It violates every principle of—
Clearly, Igti interrupted gently, we're missing something important about their technology, something we've overlooked or misunderstood.
The journey continued in subdued silence. The excitement of the race had been replaced by a thoughtful quiet as each crew member processed what they'd witnessed. Igti returned to his captain's chair, his mind churning through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. 1 hour later, the Voidbreaker glided smoothly into her designated docking berth at Galactic Council headquarters. The station was enormous, a construction that had taken 3 centuries to complete, a gleaming testament to the Council's technological prowess and cooperative spirit. Ships from dozens of species were docked in various sections, from the elegant, sweeping curves of Zeril vessels to the geometric art display of Korthon cruisers. As the docking clamp secured and the airlock pressurized, Igti stood from his chair and addressed his engineering team.
Trix, gather your senior engineers. We're going to pay a visit to our human friends.
Trix's colors rippled with curiosity. Captain?
We lost the bet fairly, and we'll honor it, but I intend to understand how we lost. If the humans are willing to explain, we should be willing to listen.
Within minutes, Igti found himself walking down the docking tube, followed by Trix and 3 other engineers from various species. His mind was racing with questions. Would it be disrespectful to ask for a tour of the human ship? Perhaps they had some secret they wanted to keep, some proprietary technology that gave them a competitive advantage. But the curiosity was overwhelming, burning in his chest like a physical need. They emerged onto the main docking level, and Igti oriented himself toward the berth where he knew the human ship would be docked. As they walked, he noticed other crew members and station personnel stopping to stare at them, whispering among themselves. News traveled fast in the close quarters of the station. The human vessel came into view, and Igti's first thought was how unremarkable it looked. The exterior was scarred and patched, clearly well used and frequently repaired. There was none of the sleek aesthetic that modern ship design favored, no elegant curves or optimized plating. It looked exactly what it was, a vessel built with centuries-old technology and maintained through pure stubbornness. And yet this unremarkable ship had beaten them. As if summoned by his thoughts, the airlock of the human ship cycled open, and Captain Parker emerged, still wearing that impossibly wide smile. Several of his crew members followed him out, all of them looking pleased with themselves. "Captain Igti!" Parker called out cheerfully, striding forward with the confident gait of a victor who was gracious enough not to gloat. "Right on time. Good flight?" Igti felt his face flush slightly, a physiological response his species exhibited when embarrassed.
Captain Parker, congratulations on your victory. You and your crew performed admirably.
The 2 captains shook hands, another human custom that had spread throughout the council due to its simple effectiveness. Parker's grip was firm and warm. "Thank you, Captain. I hope there are no hard feelings. It was all in good fun."
"None at all,"
Igti assured him, and was surprised to find he meant it. The competitive sting had faded, replaced by genuine curiosity.
"In fact, I was hoping you might be willing to satisfy my curiosity about something."
"The engines?" Parker's eyes twinkled. "You want to know how we did it?"
"Well, if you're willing to share. I understand there are proprietary concerns."
Parker waved the concern away with a laugh. "No secrets here, Captain. Hell, it's all in the reports we file with the Council every year. We're completely transparent about our modifications. You could look it up in the public database if you wanted to." He gestured toward the open airlock. "But if you like, I can show you directly. Would you and your team like a tour?" Igti's engineers were already stepping forward, their interest evident in their postures and expressions. Trix had brightened to an excited orange, and one of the Korthan engineers was practically vibrating in anticipation.
"We would be honored,"
Igti said. They entered the human ship in a group, and immediately Igti noticed the differences. The corridors were narrower than on the Voidbreaker, the ceilings lower. Everything felt more cramped, more utilitarian. There was minimal decoration, and what few personal touches existed were practical rather than aesthetic. A handhold here, a storage net there, a sign indicating direction and distance to various sections. Human crew members stopped to watch them pass, and Igti heard whispers and comments. Many were grinning, and several called out cheerfully about the free dinner. Igti nodded awkwardly at each group they passed, feeling distinctly like a specimen on display. "Don't mind them," Parker said, navigating the corridors as casually as if it was his own home. "They're just excited. It's not every day we get to show off a bit. Usually we're the ones being patronized about our charming adherence to old technology." There was no bitterness in his voice, just amused acknowledgement of reality. They passed through several sections of the ship, each as functional and worn as the last. Igti found himself comparing it mentally to the Voidbreaker's spacious, well-appointed corridors, and feeling strangely guilty about the comparison. Finally, they reached a heavily reinforced door marked with warning symbols in multiple languages. Parker pressed his palm to a scanner, and the door slid open. "Welcome," he said, "to engineering." The room beyond was larger than Igti had expected, taking up a significant portion of the ship's interior volume. And immediately, impossibly, he saw the answer to his questions. 8 warp cores. Not one massive, efficient modern core like the Voidbreaker boasted. 8 separate, distinct, obviously first-generation warp cores, arranged in a circular pattern around a central control station. Each one was a bulky piece of machinery, festooned with cooling pipes, monitoring equipment, and what looked like hastily welded reinforcements. They glowed with contained power, their containment fields visible as shimmering distortions in the air. 8, Trix whispered, his form rippling with disbelief. "They have 8 cores." Parker's grin widened. "Took you long enough to notice." "Yeah, 8 cores. Want to hear something crazy? Some crazy engineers discovered that you can push a warp core to near failure. I'm talking right up to the edge of catastrophic breach, and then turn it off, transferring the load to another core while the first one cools down. You cycle through all 8, and by the time you come back to the first, it's cool enough to push to the edge again." One of the Corthan engineers, her crystalline structure flashing with agitated light, spoke up. "But the failure rate, the cascade potential, if even one core breached during the transition." "Everything would blow up," Parker agreed cheerfully. "Oh yes, there's definitely a very small chance of catastrophic failure. The early experiments were, let's say, exciting and leave it at that. But the technology has been refined to very vigorous standards recently. We've got redundant safety systems, AI-monitored transition protocols, and automatic shutdown sequences. The actual risk is minimal. Statistically, you're more likely to die from a meteorite strike than a core failure during transition." "But how do you cool them down fast enough?" another engineer asked, his voice weak with disbelief. "The heat dissipation required to bring a near-breach core to operational temperature in the time it takes to cycle through 7 others. It cannot be accomplished with standard cooling systems." Parker laughed, clearly enjoying himself. "Liquid nitrogen and liquid helium, my friend. Old-school cryogenic cooling. Basically, the same trick we used on internal combustion engines back in the 21st century. You'd be amazed what you can accomplish with brute force cooling and a complete disregard for energy efficiency." Igti stared at the cores, his mind reeling. It was so simple, so crude, so utterly brilliantly insane. Any modern engineer would have dismissed the idea out of hand. The safety concerns, the inefficiency, the sheer inelegance of the solution. But it worked. By every god in every pantheon of every species in the Council, it actually worked. "Why?" The question burst from him before he could stop it. "Captain Parker, why would you go to such lengths? The resources required, the risk, the complexity of maintaining 8 cores instead of 1. Why push so hard to move faster?" Parker's expression softened a little, becoming more contemplative. He looked at his engines with obvious affection, the way someone might look at a beloved but troublesome pet. "You know," he said slowly,
I'm not sure there's a good answer to that question. At least not one that would make sense to most species in the Council." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Humans have this thing. We call it a need for speed. It's probably in our DNA or something. When someone tells us something can't be done, or that we've reached the limit of what's possible, something in us just refuses to accept it. We have to push further, go faster, reach higher. It's not always logical, it's rarely efficient, but it's who we are." Around them, the other human crew members had gathered, drawn by the voices in their sacred engineering space. They were nodding, smiling, clearly pleased by their captain's explanation. One of them, a young woman with grease stains on her uniform, called out, "Plus, it's just really fun to go fast." Laughter rippled through the human crew, and even Igti found himself making the clicking sound that passed for a chuckle among his people. The woman wasn't wrong. There had been something undeniably thrilling about that race, even in losing. Parker spread his hands in a gesture that encompassed the entire engineering bay, the ship, perhaps humanity itself. "Look, we know our technology is outdated by Council standards. We know you all laugh at our refusal to upgrade to modern cores, and honestly, we don't care, because we took what we had, what everyone said was obsolete and inferior, and we made it better. Not by replacing it, but by innovating around it, by thinking outside the conventional boundaries, by being just crazy enough to try something nobody else would consider. And today, that beat the best ship in your fleet." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, but it wasn't arrogant. It was the pride of someone who had worked hard, taken risks, and seen those risks pay off. Igti could respect that. More than respect it. He could admire it. "We would never have thought of this," Trix said quietly. His colors had settled into a thoughtful blue-green. "Multiple cores? Cycled through stress points? Brute force cooling? It violates every principle of elegant engineering. It's wasteful, risky, and unnecessarily complex." "And it works," Parker finished. "Sometimes the inelegant solution is the right solution. Sometimes crazy is exactly what you need." Igti looked at his engineering team and saw the same realization dawning on each of their faces. They had underestimated humanity, not because humans lacked intelligence or capability, but because they had assumed that adherence to old technology meant stagnation. They had confused tradition with inability, mistaken continuity for incompetence. "You've given us much to think about, Captain Parker," Igti said finally. "Thank you for your transparency and your hospitality." "Anytime, Captain Igti. And hey," Parker's grin returned full force, "looking forward to that dinner. I've heard the Zeril restaurants on the station make excellent exotic desserts." Later that evening, Igti found himself seated in one of the station's finest restaurants, surrounded by his bridge crew on one side and the human crew on the other. The dinner was lively, filled with laughter and surprisingly easy conversation. The formal barrier between the two crews had indeed broken down, just as Parker had hoped. As Igti watched Parker animatedly describing some other modification the humans had made to their life support systems, he realized something important. The Galactic Council was vast, representing hundreds of species and thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. But that very vastness could breed a certain complacency, an assumption that the old problems were solved, the limits were known, the boundaries were defined. Humanity, still relatively new to the Council, hadn't learned those lessons yet. They still approached problems with fresh eyes, still questioned assumptions, still dared to try the untested and the untried. And perhaps, Igti thought as he raised his glass in a toast to his human counterparts, that was exactly what the Council needed. The dinner was expensive. Zeril cuisine was renowned throughout the galaxy. But as Igti paid the bill at the end of the evening, he found he didn't mind at all. It was, he reflected, the best loss he'd ever taken. The lessons learned were worth far more than the cost of a meal.